Reading a book by Cupiderosbooks, Book 3 or Tape 3, Video 3, it's about structure. This series, reading a book, this is very helpful in a number of ways. It's helpful in a journalistic way in discovering who, what, when, where, and why of a story. It's helpful when you listen to other people on other videos, particularly political, historical, social justice videos, because you need to listen to their terms and words, how they structure things. Their particular presentation can have a kind of fictional context when you listen to it. It's kind of like you're listening to a story. The story has characters, and the characters are trying to do things. So while this is about reading a book, you can apply to novels, novellas, short stories, plays, poetry. It could also be applied to nonfiction types of books and videos, as I've mentioned already before. So this is a helpful series. I don't want you to just contain it to just reading a book. This is book 3, Structure. Read all the way through a work in one setting if possible. Don't judge a work by half of its contents. This is also very important when you listen to videos. Let the person make their argument. If you cut them off halfway through, you probably may be missing what they mean, because it is possible that they may have changed their viewpoint when they started off making their argument and then they changed it. When it comes to reading a book, read all the way through in one setting if possible. Don't judge a work by half of its contents. That's pretty much like judging a book by its cover. If you only read half of it and say, well, this is what I think it is. We don't really know until we've finished it. After you've read the work once, you will be better able to judge the work's meaning and quality. Follow the work's physical structure. How many chapters in the work? Is the work divided into 2 or 3 major parts? Book 1, Book 2, Book 3. Also, white space can be used by the author to convey meaning, scenes, and forms. What is the white space doing in the novel, novella, short story, or poem? And white space can also mean where the chapters come at. Or where the stanzas come at in a poem. All of these things are structure. Put into one sentence, what is the story about? This is called plot. After you understand the plot, you should be able to reach deeper levels of meaning. Aristotle said that plot is the soul of a story. It is its life. So plot is very important. And this is one of the distinctions between literary and popular fiction. Popular fiction has to have a plot. People want a plot. People want to know, hey, this is the problem. This is what's going to be solved. This is where it's starting out. This is where it's going. This is a romance. This is an adventure tale or a thriller. Literary sometimes does not have a plot at all. Literary fiction, sometimes the plot is barely noticeable because it's all about what's happening to the character. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people do not read literary stories. The Great Gatsby and some of the other fictions, that Scarlet Letter, a lot of fiction works started off as popular fiction, then they got adopted by the colleges and universities, and then they became literary. But there is a distinction between the literary fiction, which tends to be characters who are thinking a lot in intellectual matters, and then the difference between popular fiction. So divide the text in half. As a general rule, if your book has 13 chapters, chapter 6 or 7 will hold either the peak intensity or an important first conflict, which can help you discover the work's meaning. So you get your book, you can look at the end of it, number of pages divided by 2, open it up to that page, And if you read those pages to the left or to the right of what is the center of the book, you will find out an important meaning to the work. Probably the most important meaning to the work. Okay? Because this is how plot is structured. All right, something happens in the middle of the journey of a character. They say, usually what happens, they say, oops, I made a mistake. This is not going in the direction that I wanted it to go. There's a change of heart. There's a change in direction. But you can find this out by just opening up a book to the middle of the book without even reading all the rest of it. Now, when you do this, just keep in mind that some chapters may be longer than others. And so what you're doing when you divide the text in half, you're dividing the whole text in half. Now, if you want, you can do the same thing for a chapter. You can take a chapter. If a chapter is 14 pages, divide it by 2, it's 7. So on the 7th page of chapter 2, there's going to be an important conflict, meaning, motif, key, symbol. Something's going to happen there at that point where you need to pay attention to, and you can better understand and enjoy the text. How many total pages are in a novel or short story or poem? Divide the text into 2. Where is the middle? Scan backwards and forward plus or minus 3 pages from the center page. What is important in this section of the novel, short story, poem, or word? So, I've found that you can do the first and second page on either side of the dividing point. But if you need to, you can go back 3 pages from the center or 3 pages forward from the center. Watch the author's storytelling style. This is most important. The plot is what happens in the story. Literature criticism is watching how the story is told as opposed to what happens in the plot. Examine how the work is significant to literature. Some works are significant because they occur at important turning points in literature development, or works dictate new styles in delivering their message. One of the things about Shakespeare is when he comes along, it is at that juncture that people stop talking about the gods and they just focus on man. They focus on humans. They focus on people. The gods are no longer viewed as important. The gods are behind the scenes. The gods are not influencers. And it's almost an atheist kind of view, which is to say that now we're writing these stories and we don't want to know about the exalted final idea of what we're supposed to be trying to do. We just want to know what these characters want to do at this particular moment in time. So, we had this transition of this happening not only in literature, but in paintings as well. You would see all of a sudden people are making paintings only about everyday people. Whereas before it was about noble people, and before that it was about the gods and goddesses. So when you're reading works, you may have a particular interest in whether something is fiction work is leaning to the left of the social justice scale or to the right or conservative part of the social justice scale. Both of them are doing social justice, whether they're saying they're on the left or they're right. They're both doing that. The same thing as you may want to ask yourself, is this particular work leaning more toward and in alignment with history, or is it more in alignment with what a person thinks is going to happen and projecting history? Some novels are about things that are conventional. Other novels are about things that are unconventional. If these things that writers do to express themselves, they are very much concerned that the reader understand what they are doing. However, many average canned works exist because people blindly follow previously defined structures or forms when new forms might have better suited their work. So what you can have is like everybody jumps on the bandwagon and does a zombie story. Or everybody jumps on a bandwagon and does a vampire story where all of the vampire traits are no longer what they traditionally were. Or everybody jumps on a erotica bandwagon and you have erotica that's about bondage, whereas before it was not even about bondage. So when you're reading your novel, short story, or poem, whatever, you want to kind of pay attention to whether or not this is kind of a knockoff version of something else, or whether they just tweaked something else that has happened before. Because a lot of novels are just tweaked, changed story. The story's been changed a little bit in this direction or that direction, this character, that character, but it's still basically the same story that was written long time ago. So what side do you favor in a particular social justice argument? Are you on the conservative side, or are you on the liberal side? Or are you into postmodernism, which is there is no meaning for anything? Do you have a religious slant? Does this novel have morals, rules, values? So which side of any continuum that you know of is the novel, short story, or poem? And does it really matter which side of the continuum that the author is on when you are reading it as a reader? Do you care? Because if you are a conservative and you are reading a social justice kind of character that's liberal, you might say, well, I don't know if I really like this novel. Or you might have some kind of hesitations and prejudices about reading a novel. You may cut some arguments or ideas out that are presented in the novel because you have a different slant on life. Know if the story emerges out of setting, character, theme, or plot. So that's 4. It's either setting, character, theme, or plot. A story emerging out of setting cannot really be told in any other locale. It's like in my novel, Abandoned to Macta Island. There's no way you can tell that story if it happens in South America, if it happens in Austria, if it happens in the Middle East. It's going to be a completely different story. So the only way that story can be told is on that island where those two people are alone and they have to survive. Okay? Now, character stories are essentially about a character's strength, weakness, and motivation. And usually these, you can read a lot of Russian stories. Russian stories are character studies. So Anna Karenina is a character story. I mean, it has a background of War and Peace as a setting. War and Peace that's a setting novel. But I mean, a lot of Russian novels are about characters, and usually it's a character story because the book is named after the character. Madame Bovary, a character. The Great Gatsby, a character. Theme stories center around an idea like the plight of female circumcision, women in the 1960s. It may be a theme about men and war. That could be a theme of a novel or a book or short story or poem. Plot stories are basically something you easily recognize. You got your love story, you got your revenge story, you got your rise and fall story like Ben-Hur. You have your adventure story. You could have your quest story. So Beowulf could be a quest story, even though Beowulf is a character story because it's named Beowulf, and then he goes on this adventure, but it's about the character there. Who is he? Plot stories are the easiest thing to recognize. Most people, when they go to buy a book, they're going to buy a plot. A person who is interested in mysteries, cozy mysteries, or murder mysteries, they want the mystery plot. And the people who want love stories, they're going to buy love stories, whether they're historical, set in the past, or they're science fiction love stories set in the future, or whether it's just a contemporary love story set in present day times. So here are the setting questions. Is setting important in this work? If so, what part of the setting is most important? Why can't you simply change the setting and reveal the same plot and theme in this story? The plot questions are, where have you seen this plot story before? What is different about that plot and this plot? Plots are similar, but can vary in subtle ways which can make a big difference. What makes two stories different at the plot level? Theme questions. What theme runs like a thread throughout the entire novel? So a theme could be follow the money. And if you look at that, you would have more than one character dealing with financial issues. What makes the theme so important, more important than, say, setting, character, or plot? And this is very important. So whichever angle the novel takes, whether it's setting, character, theme, or plot, a question to ask yourself is, what if I tried to make the other thing the most important thing? So again, War and Peace is about, a theme of war and peace. I mean, it happens to be set in Russia, but it's about war and peace. But there are many characters in there. But you got to ask yourself, can you actually take one of those characters and make them the name of the novel? You can't change it into a character novel by simply changing the title of it. So, is the theme too preachy or just right? Character questions. What does this character want? Who is standing in her way? Why are they standing in her way? Does the character have fatal flaws or incidental flaws? Could any character take this character's place? Why? Why not? So one of the questions to ask about character is also, when did their strength become a weakness? At what point in the story does the character's strength become their weakness? Or you could ask the reverse. This character started out with a weakness. When did it become their strength? Be alert for stable patterns in the work, in particular, patterns of opposition along the continuum. So a continuum is a long line, and you got +1 on the left, you got -1 on the right, or you can have -1 on the left and +1 on the right. But you got 0 in the middle, okay? The two things at the end are at the opposite ends of the continuum. For example, you could have city, and then you got country. Male on the right side, female on the left. You got poverty, wealth, water, land, mind, body, private, public, light, dark, macrocosm, microcosm, reason, foolishness, plans, change, east, west, north, south, fate, which is something dictated by the gods so you can't change it, versus purpose, destiny, which a character can change and produce a different outcome. Faith versus skepticism, personal views versus public views, change, tradition, war and violence, peace and nonviolence, masking, unveiling. You can have the social justice warrior that's liberal, social justice warrior that's conservative. These patterns may reoccur throughout the work. These patterns can be plotted on a chart form. Also be aware for unstable or patterns that shift. A lot of times a character may start off in one way, one pattern, and then they shift to another one. So a character can go from being skeptical to having faith. Notice the many levels in a particular work. One level might be a personal level, another is familiar with the family, a third is communal, and a fourth is universal. So you can easily see these different levels in a thriller novel. Thriller novel starts out with basically a normal person, and they're going about their life, and some little thing happens. This little thing brings them into the kind of familiar or family situation. And then something else happens, and then they get involved in the community. It's like the story gets bigger. They thought it was a family issue, but it's actually a community issue. And then the story gets even bigger. It goes from a community issue to a national, then a universal issue. Okay, so the thriller novel keeps expanding and getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger as it unfolds. Does the writer rely on our understanding of novelistic conventions to convey their work? And I would say most do. How do they use this against the reader? How do they use this to aid the reader? So in a love story, how do they know they're gonna, at this point in the second act, they need to do something to evolve the character, the two characters, to bring them closer together at this stage, because they need to break them apart in the third act. Our author can use the plot conventions, or these conventions, even the conventions of the opposite patterns of the continuum, to pull the two main characters together, or to drive them apart, or to make the reader continue reading, or make the reader have more questions. The whole thing in reading a book is understanding that the author is trying to make the reader have reader questions. And they keep reading to get those questions answered. Remember, any other novels, can you remember any other novels that had unusual novelistic styles? There's some novels out there that are very experimental. Usually they're not that successful because people are looking for the conventions, because they understand the conventions and they know what probably should happen next, and they can follow along with the novel at the same time. They get to participate in the novel when they know that it's following conventional rules to a certain extent. What did the novels have in common that you are currently like reading? How are they similar? How are they different? And again, this information is helpful not only when reading a book. This is helpful when you're listening to political arguments, you're listening to someone talk about history or reading history, you're watching a video on a social justice conservative or a social justice liberal, someone is trying to persuade you to buy a product. I mean, this information is useful in so many ways. And for example, in journalism, we got the who, what, when, where, and why. But you get a lot of these who, what, when, where, and why questions answered right when you learn how to read a book. So this ends Book 3 on structure of reading a book by Cupiderosbooks.